with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Monday, May 9th, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Associate Professor of History at Claremont McKenna College, Lily Geismer. Author of Left Behind, the Democrats' failed attempt to solve inequality. Also on the program today, protests against a forthcoming overturning of Roe v. Wade grow as Mitch McConnell, Republican activists, and governors, Republican governors, hint that a federal ban is next. In a holiday speech, Putin says Russia had to strike Ukraine. It's more than 60 feared dead in a Russian bombing of a Ukrainian school. Joe Biden, meanwhile, announces yet another $150 million worth of weapons sale for Ukraine, as the U.S. agenda clearly now to get a win. The Department of Education is set to roll back Betsy DeVos's Title IX weakening. National Labor Relations Board accused Starbucks of unfair labor practices in Buffalo. No word yet from Howard Schultz and how this impacts his Holocaust story. Amazon fires managers at the recently unionized warehouse in Staten Island. The Taliban reinstates head-to-toe coverings for women throughout Afghanistan, perhaps in an homage to the forthcoming Supreme Court ruling in this country. And Sinn Féin have won a majority of seats in Northern Ireland's Assembly. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Another week of, well, it's getting a little crazier out there. And with us, as always, Emma Vigeland. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Sam.
Hope you had a good weekend.
Yes, I did. How about you?
I did, I guess. A little rainy, and so a couple of the Little League games were
Canceled,
which was a bummer for me. I was looking forward to it. Saul was excited because he ended up just watching Sonic 2, going to the movies, so he was psyched.
How did you feel about Jim Carrey's performance? Your favorite?
The only movies that I can handle with Jim Carrey are the Sonic movies, but the Sonic one was significantly better.
Or if
than
he's
Sonic
like
2.
really dour in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, something like that.
I mean, I guess so. He's okay in that one, but I would say Sonic is his best work, and Sonic 1, I thought maybe a little bit, Sonic 2 was heartwarming because Sonic got some friends, but
That's nice.
But I thought Sonic 1 was just a better.
That's the essential one.
It was just a better film. It's just a better film.
If you're gonna see one, see the original.
It's not like the Godfather movies.
No.
Oh, you're a Godfather 2 guy?
I mean, I don't really care.
Okay, man.
All right. Let's get to this. This is. This is. I think the thing that really started to make me really nauseous about this was the tweet from the White House, frankly. But the idea that we would be on the precipice of the greatest and maybe the single most rollback of individual rights in this country that we have ever seen. I mean, certainly we have examples of following the Civil War of like physical violence against black politicians and black people who were accruing wealth. And certainly we have the Jim Crow era and a court that was allowing for proxy ways to deny black people votes when we talk about the 1890s through, frankly, the 1960s, early 60s. But we are on the precipice of the greatest, most explicit rollback of individual rights in the history of this country. It has been legal in this country for a woman to decide what she will do as far as maintaining a pregnancy for 50 years. And we are moving into an era where in at least 25, maybe up to 28 states, as of maybe July of this year, women will be forced to carry pregnancies to term. They will be forced to give birth. At least that's what the state intention is. And so the idea that this would happen without any protest, or that there is some measure of just protest, that would be off limits is absurd. Here is neighbors of Justice Kavanaugh, literally his neighbor, organized a protest. What's her name?
I'm not sure, but she's done this before, right? Do we have her name? Bradley's getting it, but you know those block parties got to be awkward.
Her name is Lacey Wooten Hallway, and she has been conducting a lot of demonstrations outside Kavanaugh's house even before the decision was leaked. So she's kind of been on the ground in Chevy Chase, Maryland, for quite some time.
Okay, so so his neighbors have protested. There's about 100 people out there, and here it is.
We will not go back. 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 We will not go back.
Now, I should say, Chuck Schumer lives in Brooklyn. And almost on any weekend, not any weekend, but like, maybe 3 times, 4 times a year, depending on what's going on, there will be a crowd of more than 100 people out in front of his building.
Which is a high rise, right?
It's not it's a bigger building in Brooklyn. It's right by Prospect Park, and people are protesting. Now, think of how many times we have seen outrage from the media, how many times we have seen the White House tweet about you shouldn't be protesting this. And let's also be clear. There have been multiple times over the years, including in the 2012 decision of the ACA, it was reported in the Wall Street Journal that there have been lobbying by conservatives on the court. In 2012, it was of John Roberts, to try and pressure him to reverse, to really sink all of the ACA. There is every reason to believe that this leak, because of the Wall Street Journal editorial from 2 weeks ago, before this leak came out, where it was clear that there was pressure being asserted on these 5 Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices, a couple of whom were wavering in their decision about abortion, to hold tight. So it's not like there isn't political pressure that we have documented reporting about that is taking place just because it's happening behind closed doors.
I mean, there's articles about how anti-abortion activists were getting impatient with Amy Coney Barrett. Just go down the list. But this is beyond the pale. They want the pressure to be exerted onto them at cocktail parties and at legal functions. But if it's so this is the White House tweet here, yeah. But if it's the actual people doing it, that's beyond the pale.
And here is Jen Psaki. POTUS strongly believes in the constitutional right to protest, but that should never include violence, threats, or vandalism. Okay, here's the point. We played that clip. There hasn't been a single report not a single report of violence, threats, or vandalism. There was 100 people out there in the rain standing on the sidewalk or in the street saying, we will not go back. And so by setting this up like this, all of a sudden they're creating a straw person. The fact is, I'm old enough to remember where there was a Republican senator on the floor of the Senate talking about why he could understand why people were threatening federal judges. We didn't see any of that. And yet the White House is out there making this now about the threats to the judiciary. And the reason why they're doing that is because they're doing nothing else. Nothing else. They're not talking about reforming the Supreme Court. They're not talking about court packing. They're not talking about pressuring anybody in the Senate to bust the filibuster. None of it.
So there's no violence, threats, or vandalism that we've seen.
There's no concern for their personal safety. None of it.
But this is state violence that these conservative priests are imposing on half of the population. Women are going to seek alternative methods to end their pregnancies, which could be dangerous. Hopefully there's, it's different from before the Roe times and there's more access to abortion pills, but still, this is the state forcing women to carry pregnancies to term, and that is state violence in and of itself.
Meanwhile, here's Justice Clarence Thomas also complaining about he is at a speech. I don't know how he got to go at a speech with all the threats and violence. How could he have possibly left his house?
He needed to be in a panic room.
Justice Thomas, people need to live with outcomes we don't agree with. Now, it's quite possible things are so tense at the Thomas household that this is his way of trying to signal to his wife, Ginny Thomas, that you got to get over this whole 2020 election thing that you were part and parcel of in the storming of the Capitol. It bodes ill for a free society that the court can't be an institution that can be bullied into giving you just the outcomes you want. Now, of course, remember, Ginny Thomas was pounding Mark Meadows with texts, not get the people out. You got to tell Trump to do something. She was saying, you guys got to pursue this.
Yeah.
Because Joe Biden stole the election. And as far as protests, put this one up too. I'm also old enough to remember when this Supreme Court, no, that's not it. When the Supreme Court ruled that in Massachusetts, the buffer zone that they had set up to keep anti-abortion protesters from harassing and terrorizing women who were going in to end their pregnancies, the Supreme Court struck down that abortion clinic buffer zone law. Scroll down into this piece and you'll see some of the quotes. Keep going, because you've got John Roberts saying that there's a room for that the First Amendment is the most important thing. Here it is. Even though the act is content neutral, it still must be narrowly tailored to serve a significant interest. The buffer zones burden substantially more speech than necessary to achieve the Commonwealth's asserted interest, which is to protect these women. So here it is, like the standard in which, and just to be clear, the standard in which these people are using, and by these people I mean the justices, is that to abridge free speech in the question, I guess, of abortion, one must need an incredibly high threshold. But of course, whining that, 100 people are out in front of someone's house saying, we will not go back, crosses that threshold.
You just have to live with decisions that you don't agree with. You just have, just like my wife, you just have to live with decisions you don't agree with. Yeah, right. Women will be forced to live with this decision, and they'll have to work around this decision. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that we have to go quietly into the good night. Give me a break. You don't have, the mentality of these justices as if they're above reproach and they can make these decisions that affect hundreds of millions of people's daily lives, and that because they have lifetime appointments and because they're ostensibly outside of politics, they're free from consequences. Sorry, no dice.
And we should say, this whole process is clearly incredibly political. That's what that leak was about. I mean, it was about pressuring. It wasn't about maybe 100 protesters are going to change Kavanaugh's mind. No, this was about locking in those conservative justices and voting that way. And if they actually ever do find the leaker, I think that's going to be quite obvious. All right, we're going to get to Lily Geismer in just a moment. We've got some sponsors for today's show. And we're also going to be talking about where they're going next, because it does not end with this. This is just the beginning. Believe me. Folks, 11 million open jobs, I think, was the last report. If you want to find someone good for your job, you need to know where to go. Certain people who work on this show make my life much easier. Got them second order from ZipRecruiter. If you own a growing business and you need to hire, ZipRecruiter makes hiring much easier because they do all the heavy lifting for you. And right now, you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter uses powerful technology to find and match the right candidates up with your job. Makes it super easy. They got a great user interface. They organize these things really well. You can easily review the recommended candidates. Then you just easily invite your top choices to apply. Plus, ZipRecruiter has a complete suite of tools that makes it easy to filter, review, and rate your candidates. No more, messy spreadsheets or huge notes on the back of envelopes, as I used to do back in the day. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. No wonder ZipRecruiter is the #1 rated hiring site based on G2 satisfaction ratings as of January 1st, 2022. Just a reminder, that's the way we got old Brendan. He's not old, but he's emeritus. He's still working on the show, but remotely now. That's the way we found Brendan. We found Bradley through Brendan. There you go. Electricity. ZipRecruiter has staffed a huge portion of this show, and it was super easy, and we did great with it. The hardest thing you have to do is remember our URL. That is ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's where you go to try ZipRecruiter for free. Once again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/MAJORITY. ZipRecruiter, it's the smartest way to hire. Also, the show is sponsored today by something I lean on every day, and that is Liquid IV. 1 stick of Liquid IV Hydration Multiplier in 16 ounces of water hydrates you faster and more efficiently than water alone. Plus, Liquid IV comes in refreshing flavors like watermelon, lemon lime, strawberry, pina colada, one that I've been going to lately, tangerine. Liquid IV contains 5 essential vitamins, B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C. With Liquid IV, you get 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks. And Liquid IV is made with premium ingredients. It is non-GMO. It is free from gluten, dairy, and soy. The science of cellular transport technology is what makes Liquid IV so effective. It's designed to enhance rapid absorption of water, other key ingredients into the bloodstream. Maybe you had too much to drink. Maybe you need to get hydrated fast. Maybe you've been working out. You need to get hydrated. Maybe you've been doing plane travel. Comes in very easy, packable, small packets. You bring a dozen with you on a trip. Liquid IV is also on a mission to change the world. The company's donated over 20 million servings globally. We all,
yeah,
it's
I
a
use
big
all the
part of
time.
it. I mean, everybody who watches
I've got
the
my
show
family
knows
to use it too.
Grab Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco, or you can get 25% off when you go to liquidiv.com. Use the code MajorityRep at checkout. That's 25% off anything you order when you use promo code MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. Experience better hydration today at liquidiv.com. Promo code MajorityRep. MajorityRep. Also, lastly, everyone in this office, because, well, for two reasons. One, spring started late in the Northeast. It's still a little chilly, but because it started late, the blossoms came out late on the fruit trees, and there was nothing frozen, and so we're gonna be looking forward to some good Korean pears. Why?
Wow.
Because I planted a fast-growing tree from fastgrowingtree.com last year, and it pumps out it doesn't pump them out. It grows them within a year. Spring and summer is nearing. It's time to make your outdoor space feel more like a yard and less like a plant cemetery. When it comes to caring for your plants, know-how matters. That's why fastgrowingtrees.com experts curate thousands of plant varieties that are going to thrive in your specific climate and location. For me, I'm growing zone 5. You order online or over the phone, your plants are shipped to your door in 1 or 2 days, plus their growing and care advice is available 24/7. Doesn't matter if you're looking for increased privacy or shade or adding natural beauty or fruit trees, fast-growing trees have the perfect plants and expertise to help you find them. Even if you've never had a green thumb, they'll make you feel like you do. 1 million home gardeners have already seen what fastgrowingtrees.com can do for them. Plus, with their 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, you can trust everything will be healthy for years to come. Honestly, I have ordered and I've bought plants and trees from many places. I have never had the success that I've had, but for fastgrowingtrees.com. In fact, I was using them before they became a sponsor.
Wow.
Yep.
That's how you know it's legit.
Yep. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com/majority right now. You'll get 15% off your entire order. Get 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com/majority. fastgrowingtrees.com/majority. Okay. Want to welcome back to the program Lily Geismer. She is an associate professor of history at Claremont McKenna College, author of Left Behind, the Democrats' Failed Attempt to Solve Inequality. Lily Geismer, welcome back to the program. I think it's been a couple of years. We've had you on for your first book, Don't Blame Us, about suburban liberals dealing with the Massachusetts corridor around, I think it was 128, and a couple of pieces that you wrote about that. And now you've written a book about really the ascendancy of the DLC. I just want to start, why was that the next obvious book for you to write?
Well, thank you so much for having me back on and for such a good memory of my my last appearances. The book Left Behind actually emerged in many ways from my my first book, which was looking at suburban liberals in Massachusetts. And the book ended with Mike Dukakis and his time as governor of Massachusetts, and then his run for presidency in 1988. I'm sorry. And I was really interested in this as I was looking at Mike Dukakis, his embrace of tech as a solution to solving economic growth in Massachusetts, and how that then led to his being nominated for the presidency in 1988, and also his increasing use of the market and ideas of sort of using the market to do good. And I just wanted to think about how this was actually true of the Democratic Party more broadly. So how it became increasingly invested in using the private sector to do the work that was once largely it was advocated by Democrats that the government should do those kinds of programs, especially to help poor people and address problems of inequality.
I grew up in Massachusetts. I remember the Massachusetts Miracle that was basically bringing a lot of those tech companies to that 128 corridor. And I remember when Bill Clinton was elected and looking around going like, I remember exactly where I was, and I remember, everybody sort of celebrating, and I thought like, oh, I can understand why there's a sigh of relief, but really, I was not that excited. And my understanding of the DLC and that whole turn that took place through that time was as a defensive measure. And I mix into this also Tony Coelho, who was a California Democrat who started raising a bunch of corporate money. And all these things sort of took place simultaneously. But your book sort of rejects that and makes the argument that this was actually sort of like a wrong, but affirmative, like ideological shift. Give us a sense before we get to that part of it, how these people, and a lot of this came out of like the Southwest, how these Democrats perceive the Democratic Party, and then talk about where the shift came from.
Yeah, so that's absolutely right. So the thing that I tried to understand, I think the classic story of the DLC and the Democratic Party more broadly since the late 1960s is that everything that they did was in defensive reaction to the Republicans. And so the Republican Party is really the dominant story of kind of politics from the 70s onwards. And so when people like Bill Clinton and the cohort of New Democrats who are around the DLC were advocating for the market, it was all just kind of this, it's based on the idea of sort of how people think about it as triangulation, which was Dick Morris's famous strategy in the 1986 election. And so that it was just kind of stealing from the Republicans. And I wanted to look at how it wasn't just, there's a component of reacting to Republicans, but they actually really believed in the ideas of the market and to do good. And it is a bigger story than just Bill Clinton and goes back really to people like Tony Coelho and a broader group of Democrats who come into office in 1974 under the name at the time of the Watergate babies. And Dukakis is one of them, as are people like Tim Wirth and Gary Hart, who all have the idea that they're called the Watergate babies because they came in 1974 after Watergate, but really who they were opposing was the traditional Democratic Party. And they believed that the Democratic Party had become too beholden first to sort of ideas of bureaucracy and big government. And the party needed to be more efficient in its approaches to dealing with social problems. They were critical of the Great Society. But the other real problem they had is the Democrats there are two things. One is that they had become too beholden to what they called special interest groups, and especially the labor movement, and needed to kind of readdress its strategies in terms of kind of political strategy to really focus on more middle class, moderate suburbanites who are many of their constituencies, and that was kind of the future. The other big thing was that the party's economic policies were too beholden to Keynesian economic theory and kind of too focused on, especially on, and with relation to labor, too focused on kind of manufacturing and needed to focus on what becomes new economy sectors like tech, trade, and finance. And so those things together would kind of be the future of the party. So that's really what they sort of begin to advocate in the 1970s, and it really comes to take hold by the 1980s and then the 1990s under Bill Clinton.
But the concept of efficiency, you mentioned that word, right? And as the party transitions to tech, finance, etc., that's a very financial or techie term as opposed to the Keynesian economics of the past. So, how did those interest groups and industries influence that kind of thinking within the party during that time?
It's interesting because I think there's this idea of that they, sort of having those kinds of relationships where they're being sort of influenced in various different ways. And I think a lot of that comes later. There do become, and my book tracks actually especially the Democratic Party's relationship to Silicon Valley. But initially, the part of it has to do with there's a longstanding faith within liberalism and the Democratic Party in sort of technocratic approaches. And so this goes back to the New Deal, which was very technocratic in its nature. And there's a piece of the market itself that's quite kind of technocratic in its approach and is more efficient. And actually, there's a belief that it's more transparent, even though it's been, in many ways, those kind of relationships become not very non-transparent. But I think especially after the 1960s, where you have after Vietnam and then Watergate with this idea of government lying, there's a notion that sort of turning to the market will make it more both transparent, but also more efficient. And bringing in the kind of ideas of the private sector will make government a more effective measure, more effective. And that's really been this ethos that the Democratic Party has really promoted really since the 1970s, or a wing of the Democratic Party. And I think it's become kind of the mainstream idea that you need to make government more efficient. That's sort of how it operates. I mean, the DLC promoted the idea of like, we want to promote opportunity, not government, which is that kind of thinking.
I don't know, for some reason when you mentioned that, it also reminded me of McNamara too, right? I mean, he was brought in from Ford, I mean, to do this with the Vietnam War. Very efficient, or theoretically anyways. But I just want to go backwards just a little bit too, just to get a sense of like where this emanated from, because I know, and then we can talk about also like, you know, what ultimately became their neoliberalism is slightly different from the neoliberalism that came out of like Mont Pelerin and Milton Friedman and that whole crew. But how much of this was also a reaction to the sort of emancipatory politics of the mid 60s? Because I know that, you know, the Democratic Party has a huge shift over the course of like those 20 years from the end of 1940s to, you know, the end of the 1960s, where the Democratic Party had never won an election without a majority of white people. And then after 1960, late 1960s, never wins an election with a majority of white people. How much of that played into this? Like when we hear special interests, you know, and I think like in your first book, we see the beginning of the end of the relationship with the unions and the Democratic Party. But also we're talking about other special interests too, right? I mean, and when I hear that, I hear like Black people, women, I mean, and how much of that was a pushback against that type of politics?
It's a combination. And so there's a language so a lot of the language that emerges. And so there's this iteration. So it's the Watergate babies who come into Congress, then they're often known actually as the first neoliberals or Atari Democrats. And they talk a lot about the ideas of shifting away from fairness to opportunity. And so fairness is a word that is deeply embedded in kind of ideas of social justice and the kind of social movements that you're talking about, particularly the civil rights movement. And that it sounds like it's a minor move, but it's actually a major one, that if you can kind of promote ideas of opportunities, everyone has the chance to do that, which actually also is kind of market oriented in its thinking, because it's like the market can give everyone the chance to go ahead to be great. It's also meritocratic. And that goes back to some stuff I talked about in my first book as well. So that's the kind of language that they're using. And the belief is that the party had been too focused on kind of sort of redistribution. And that was sort of the ways in which they were helping redistribution. And then also kind of these ideas of fairness, which is to give every group a say and to help groups in those ways. The Democrats of this kind of ilk are still in language focused on ideas of we want to help everyone and we believe in equal rights for women, for people of color, but their strategies do point in other ways. And I actually say that the ideology does just in many ways too. And that's kind of some of the ways that sort of giving the market is giving everyone an opportunity to do that, as opposed to actually taking steps to ensure that that's possible. And those do have their roots in beginning in the 1970s, but really kind of come into being by the 1980s and 1990s.
And was there something about something that was going on, or in the nature of the Southwest, or the fact that there was like sort of I don't know, more expansion going on in the Southwest at that time that led so many of these people who espoused, I guess, this ideology to come from the Southwest?
There's a couple of things that that lead to it, and I can get, if I don't want to be too overly weedsy, but I'll I'll give the answer. So there are two different things that are going on. One is, so it's interesting with the story. I can use the story of Bill Clinton in particular, who's more from the South, but in a state like Arkansas was losing a huge amount of its it lost a huge amount of its industry. That it was a very manufacturing sort of state based on the idea of smokestack chasing, where in the 50s, they brought in all these companies who opened one company towns. But by the 70s, those companies had left and moved production overseas. So they desperately were in need of industry. And people like Bill Clinton see what was going on in Route 128 and Silicon Valley as the solution to the problems of places like Arkansas. So there's this focus on that as the kind of going to save our states. That they also recognize the realignment that you described within the Democratic Party itself. And there's a whole wing of people who become part of the DLC who were Southern moderate Democratic governors like Chuck Robb of Virginia. And they recognize that how the Democrats are going to regain office is by focusing on white swing voters. So the people you described who are leaving the Republican Party, and that some of the ways by the time the DLC comes into by 1985, that was kind of what the language was perceived. So when the DLC starts, it's all white men, primarily from the South and Southwest, and that's part of what the idea of what they're trying to do, that they're worried the party is going to take a different direction. I think it's actually this really interesting moment because there's like sort of this split as to where the Democratic Party could have gone in the 1980s. And this is the approach that they see as kind of critical to both ideologically what the party should do, but also in terms of its electoral strategy.
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but the idea of wanting to replicate what happened at Route 128 in Massachusetts, in Arkansas, is a prime example of why almost the whole ideology doesn't work. There's just not enough to go around. It's not scalable, and that's ends up being a problem with a lot of these ideas.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of all of the kind of, I look at this range of different market-based ideas that they promote, especially around things like banking and things like microfinance. And a lot of them are sort of small-scale solutions to much bigger problems. So there is the other issue. I mean, the major thing that's happening that is sort of underneath this, and I gestured to in a couple of places, is that the economy is going through a major recession in the 1970s. And there's this question of sort of, we need to come up with a solution to these problems. And so the future lies in tech and trade and finance, and we need to bring those across the country. And this becomes really part of the Democratic Party's what they're going to offer for the future. So that goes back to the Mike Dukakis example. It is really what Bill Clinton sells in the 1990s, and I think it's really fascinating because to your point of like saying this isn't going to work, like these ideas are still promoted. Like this is the whole turning coal miners into coders. Like it's not. There's this relentless idea in that faith and kind of that the tech industry can solve all of these problems when it's been proven time and time again, it just can't.
Well, I have a theory as to why it's so relentless is because those exact same people are still in power within the Democratic Party. And so they, usually you come in with one idea and it's going to take you for the rest of your career that's the way most people operate. But let me ask you this before, and I want to get into the details of Shore Bank and of microfinance. It's just because you focus on those examples in particular. But why did they win? I mean, and I think we're on the other side of that saga on some level. It's still hanging on white knuckled within the Democratic Party, but I think there's at least a lot of indications that philosophy has died or is in convalescence. But why did they win at that time?
So I think it's a couple of different things. I think that this that are happening, and that's a sort of critical question. So, and as I said, there was these moments of kind of, we look back to 1980s where the Democratic Party was, and this moment of kind of that it's often for political historians this moment of kind of failure, that there were two large losses at the at the presidential level. And so the party, 1984 and 1988 are both really interesting because you had someone like Jesse Jackson in the primary, and that could have been a direction for the party at that point to go after the very special interest groups and to make that the kind of coalition of the party. The DLC promotes this other approach of kind of we focus on moderate, the kind of moderate swing voters and largely white and not non-voters. That's what the sort of idea that you go after people who are not voting in elections would be the kind of Jesse Jackson approach to this kind of non-voter approach. That's part of what I think leads to sort of these narrow wins. And I think it's really important. Bill Clinton did not win by a huge landslide in 1992. It was a narrow victory with a
he didn't even
third-party
get
candidate.
50%.
Yes, and so that's some of what happened. I mean, there was a third party candidate who skimmed off a fair amount of, it's a question of where that would have gone. I also think the issue is that one of the things is that Bill Clinton was a tremendously charismatic politician. So I think what I argue happens is that you have the DLC, and then they had this theory that to win, for the Democrats to recapture power was to win the presidency, and you focus on the presidency to kind of gain dominance. And they needed a good candidate, and Bill Clinton was rising up through their ranks. They select him to be their chair, and so that becomes really effective. So you have this. I do think the ideology was really powerful, and Bill Clinton became a really, really powerful mouthpiece for it, and that leads to the kind of the winning in 1992. And then I think there's a number of things that happened in 1996, largely having to do with the economic growth of the 90s that leads Bill Clinton to win again. But I think one of the biggest issues for the Democratic Party has been this effort to kind of recapture that moment for so long, and just understand, like, to kind of try to recreate those dynamics. And I think one of the things has been to focus on these candidates to try to get that way, which has created real problems in the kind of larger infrastructure of the party then. So that goes to the kind of narrow win, but with really long-term consequences. Coupled with my argument would be in the book too, is that we often focus on elections, but actually it's like what happens in office when they enact policy that really matters. And so that there was all of these policies that are put into place that had really long-term and in many ways detrimental effects.
Right. I guess I was asking less about why he won the national election than as opposed to that sort of like internecine fight within the Democratic Party. And I mean, I'm trying to remember that I feel like it was his charisma and he talked like a populist too. Like he and Obama had a similar sort of like ability to come off as a populist, even though they weren't.
And turn it on during election years. I mean,
without
in
a doubt.
2012, Obama spoke very differently than how he governed.
Oh, yes. I mean, it was very much like an affect as much as it was, Bill Clinton would go to McDonald's and they had to like tie him down so he wouldn't go to McDonald's was the like in the run up to, I mean, I remember that was the big story about Bill Clinton. He would and the stories that they would always come out with, like he just spent his whole time talking to the guy at McDonald's and that was like they had him jogging to work off his McDonald's and that was all the so that in many respects it was just sort of almost like a luck of a draw in terms of him winning that primary in 1992, I guess.
Well, the primary in 92 was a really complicated one with all these people, and he sort of did come out on top. I mean, he was a profoundly effective politician. And I think the other thing, and so with the DLC component, so they had this whole idea of we expand, opportunity, not government, through free markets was really their mantra. And Bill Clinton was able to sort of, as you said, was able to promote that in a populist language that was really effective. And so this idea, and it was like we're coming in with kind of a new approach, we're new kinds of Democrats. And that notion after 12 years of the Democratic Party not holding power was, I think, was effective and pervasive in a number of different ways. I think the other thing, I mean, which I argue in the book, going back to like this being affirmative, is Bill Clinton really did believe. So like the DLC, and I think he really, to help, as I show in the book, helped to kind of solidify certain aspects of their policies as well. But he really believed in the idea of the market to do good for poor people. So this idea that you could kind of use the market to do what was traditionally the Democratic Party traditionally achieved through government, that you could sort of use the private sector to do those things. And that's something that he believed, he really had a belief in. So it wasn't just kind of pure political strategy.
I want to get into Shorebank, into the microfinance, but just tell us the concept of doing well by doing good. I mean, that's a nice sort of like, I don't know, a cake and eat it too type of thing, or I can't tell what that is. It's sort of a rationale, maybe.
Well, it's that, and so that my book looks a lot of that kind of language, and using that actually as a way to think about the dominant ethos of the DLC and Clinton, which is this idea that you can use the market to do what government could do, but also that the market can sort of grow at the same time. And so instead of like the traditional democratic approach or liberal approach would be to keep those separate. So you want to do well by doing economic growth and then having compensatory social welfare programs. You can fuse those together so that the private sector can do the work of government. And that's what I look at in the book, is this becomes kind of critical to the Democratic Party under Bill Clinton's governing strategy. Another language that's just have your cake and eat it too is a lot of language of win-wins. So this idea that and the idea of a win-win is that then it doesn't address the fact that in a capitalist system or when you're using the market, you have wins and losses. And so this idea it's good for everybody. And that's really what becomes the logic of the New Democrats DLC approach to governance.
That's also just Silicon Valley, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel like that phrase has been repeated it's very much how, not to bring up Theranos, but they justify their kind of business practices and they attract a lot of neoliberal investors using that ideology, honestly.
Totally. And so I think the thing about that I found, I mean, that's why you have this kind of coalescence of the Democrats with Silicon Valley, is that the ethos is actually quite similar. And so that it's attractive. So it's not just about kind of the money, let's pay, we're going to give you lots of donations. It's actually, they believed in these ideas as well. And so in the book, I look extensively at their relationship with charter schools, which is a very much like doing well by doing good kind of idea too. And that's it becomes kind of critical to the language of how I think Silicon Valley and the Clinton version of the Democratic Party, the ideas that they promote.
That's certainly the quote that I'm going to use when I go work for Jeff Bezos in his new initiative that we haven't worked out yet, the details. But I talk about Shorebank and how that sort of plays into that whole thing.
Yeah, so one of the things the book tracks is this community development bank called Shorebank, which is based in Chicago, or it was started in the 1970s, and it was the idea that you could use a commercial bank to do economic redevelopment in a low-income community. And they were based in South Shore, which is the neighborhood in Chicago. It's actually where Michelle Obama grew up. And Bill Clinton becomes really taken with this idea that Shorebank is successful in Chicago, and invites the founders to start a bank in the 1980s in Arkansas, based on this model. And Shorebank at the time had also been working with Muhammad Yunus, who was the founder of Grameen Bank, which is kind of seen as the kind of really the founders of microfinance and the ideas of microenterprise in Bangladesh, which is the idea of giving small loans to poor women to help them start their own businesses. And the people from Shorebank tell the Clintons about Yunus. They become really, really taken with that idea. So they bring him to Arkansas as well to start a microenterprise organization in the Arkansas Delta in the 1980s. And then when Bill Clinton's running for president in 1992,
does that have success? I mean, it almost sounds laughable. Like we're gonna get each one of these poor women. They're gonna start their own businesses. Like, who's going to buy this stuff? Like, everybody's got their own business and everybody's I don't know, selling
and the cream will rise to the top. The best of the best will come out of it. I mean, so it's just capitalism.
But that's that's not the theory, isn't that like some's going to just like, we're going to get some people to explain. It's like, it's going to sustain everybody. I don't understand.
They don't care. I mean, they probably don't really think about sustaining everybody. They're fine with a certain level of, I mean, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm talking over you, but.
No. I mean, it's an interesting idea because it's like why this, and this was a really, I mean, microfinance, microenterprise by the early 2000s was this idea that sort of caught on like wildfire, and especially internationally. And there's questions of if it actually works internationally as well. And so, but I mean, Mohammed Yunus won the Nobel Prize, and it sort of there's questions if it's working there. But I think the idea that this could work in the U.S. is one of the things that I look at, and what they want to do is actually to use it for two things. One is to do economic redevelopment in these communities that have lost all their businesses, but also to replace welfare. So it's the idea like you don't need you don't need to get welfare payments. You can turn your hobby into a business. So like you love to sell coffee cake, like you can do that and promote it. And then you can start like what the theory behind it is like you'll be really good at selling your coffee cakes. So then you'll start your own coffee cake company, and then you'll employ other people in the town, and they can all work for you. And then you'll have that's the kind of self-sustaining growth. So that's like the idea behind it. And this was, I mean, the Clintons promoted this like crazy in the 90s. And then Hillary Clinton really made it part of her kind of mission as first lady, and then as senator, and then as first lady, actually, as a secretary of state later, internationally. And it's been proven widely not to work in the US for many of the reasons that you can assume. I mean, and so I think it's this very idealistic idea. And so some of the idea of cream rising with the crop, it's this idea that everyone at their core wants to be an entrepreneur. So I think that it's like this entrepreneurial based idea. What I argue in the book and other places is that this is one of the things it does, and this is actually also where it connects to Silicon Valley, because people like the founder of eBay love this. Like they are like really taken with this idea. But it actually sort of like obscures it by calling everyone an entrepreneur. It obscures fundamental class differences. So like Jeff Bezos and the woman selling coffee cake are not the same, but it's sort of putting them in the same category. So you don't address the fact that these people don't have stability. Like that's what you lose when you're an entrepreneur. And if you're taking away welfare at the same time, it has really, really negative impacts.
It seems insane to me on multiple levels, the idea that this is because I think you make the point in the book that like, there's nothing wrong with a microfinance, but to have it be the center point of a way of addressing these things have it be the center. I mean, I think it would be a great add-on.
And at the expense of social programs.
Well, yeah, that's
right,
the point. Is that like, as an add-on after the fact, but the idea that you're going to have enough micro financed businesses that grow to replace social services, and then the idea that like I'm a woman with one child who makes $18,000 a year. I don't have any intergenerational wealth. I don't have family or friends who are wealthy either, but I'm similarly situated as someone who does have all those things to make a chance I'm making my big life's bet on this coffee cake. It's insane. It's insane to think that this is scalable. I can't wrap my head around how anybody thought that it was. I mean, on some level, I feel like, and this I think is too much of a psychological assessment, but both Barack Obama and Bill Clinton came from very messed up situations where their meteoric rise within the context of our country, I think, blinded them to the reality of like, they just won the lottery. And essentially they won life's lottery, and they just assume everybody else can too.
Well, I think there's a lot. There's so much to that. I think that's, and also many other Democrats who believe in this idea are people who all had success in various different ways and sort of have a faith that that's the way you go forward. And I think absolutely. So the point I make in the book is like, I don't think microfinance or microenterprise is a bad idea in and of itself. Like if you have it on top of having a robust social welfare state, but the idea that this could replace it is faulty. And I think the problem is it then actually leads to, this is where we have increased inequality after the 1990s. So it actually sort of harms and leads to sort of further shrinking the social safety net to the point you have nothing. And for Bill Clinton in particular, like goes to also his larger promotion of welfare to work, is that he often would talk about this idea of kind of, it's not just the kind of that you'd have the money, but it's also the sort of psychological power of having a job. And so he really believed in this notion that, and that was good for your kids too, to see you have a job. And that goes to like his own sort of psychoanalysis of his own childhood experience, that like for poor people, they need to have particular kind of notion of a role model of success, and having mothers who work will do that.
How much did the Moynihan report play into their thinking?
I'm trying to think. I mean, there have particular ideas of sort of that that women, you need to have sort of particular ideas of sort of strong families. I mean, I think the other thing that goes to the sort of the Moynihan report, but more the story of sort of the welfare queens from it. And this is another thing I argue in the book, is that in some ways, this is different than the welfare queen argument, because it's sort of saying, it's instead of saying like every poor person is like the potential entrepreneur, but it actually then blames people who are not, who don't follow who don't do that. And so in the book, I use a lot, Clinton uses classic language of like play hard and work hard and follow the rules, but that inherently stigmatizes people who are not, who are purportedly not following the rules. And then those people get incredibly punitive punishment for it, be that losing welfare benefits, but then also this is coupled with all of the crime legislation of the 1990s. So those two things actually come to work hand in hand. So you have this idea of like, it's repositioning who is like a good poor person and a bad poor person. So like the successful micro enterprise is like entrepreneur is like a good poor person who's working hard, whereas like anyone else falls into this other category. And is deeply stigmatized and actually like often in prison for it.
And I feel I feel
like got really dark there.
No, but I feel like that narrative also works the other way in sort of like a Paul Ryan-esque type of thing, because if we set it up so that if you play by the rules, you get a fair shake, the land of opportunity, it also then comes back around and says like, and so if you're not doing well, that's because you're not playing by the rules. And we start to get into sort of like Paul Ryan territory here. It feels like, in terms of that ideology. How is this neoliberalism, this notion of, private-public partnerships, and the idea of like, we're just going to give, we're going to help people in business, and that's going to supplant the role of government. And then, and I should say, we saw this all through the Obama administration in like Cass Sunstein and all sorts of other figures who had this similar ideology. How is that different from the neoliberalism of the Mont Pelerin strain that goes through Milton Friedman?
Yeah, and this is something I look at in my book too, which I was really interested in, is this idea. So oftentimes Clinton is lumped together with this kind of, with these other forms of neoliberalism under Reagan and Friedman and the Mount Pelerin Society. And I see the difference as they still believe in a place for government. And so it's the idea of government as catalyst. So government is sort of what creates the spark between the public and private sectors, in a way that there's still a place there that government has particular responsibilities to make those possible. The Mount Pelerin Society, Milton Friedman, this is a kind of grossly oversimplified version of it, but they really believe in sort of getting government out. So ideally, someone like Paul Ryan or Jack Kemp, who was kind of his predecessor of sort of the compassionate conservative kind of ilk of Republican, their ultimate idea is that everything goes to the private sector. So like everything ultimately becomes privatized in a way that this version does not believe in. They still believe in this idea of government playing some particular role, but it's a more limited role than you would see under a more kind of socially Democratic Party. And I think what I argue in the book is that actually, like, I really believe that intent matters. So you could say that the outcome is exactly the same. You still have poor people in a position where the social safety net has been eviscerated. There's vast inequalities in all kinds of ways, but it's actually really important to understand what they were trying to do. And a lot of these programs, be it looking to the tech and promoting the tech industry and various different forms of deregulation, the idea was this was actually going to help people.
Where are we? Is that that epoch? Are we done with that era? I mean, are we too close to really be able to say it's definitively over? But is it? And I know this isn't, as a historian, I'm asking you to project into the future. But in 15 years from now, are historians going to start to say like, okay, it ended in, I don't know, the second decade of the 20th century, this started to end?
Well, I think about this, and I would be curious of both of your thoughts too on it. In my mind, it's culturally over to some degree. I mean, you don't have this. The Democratic Party did not, in the 2020 election, promote things like charter schools and all of the kind of market programs like micro enterprise that were so sort of quintessential. And I do think Obama did do a lot of that in the mid, 2010, around 2010 to 2012. And this kind of culturally, tech doesn't hold the same place that it once did. But I still think they're still holding. It's affected policy in various different ways, and it's had long-term effects on the ability to create certain kinds of policies. So while I see sort of someone like Biden is not using that kind of language, I think the impact has still been there. And I do think there's the potential for those things to come back, given sort of who holds power. And that's what's kind of dangerous. I think also the other place that's quite, if you think about it just in terms of the Democratic Party, the other kind of component of this is that the Democrats go time and time again back to this political strategy. So as the DLC is shut its doors and they don't, Bill Clinton's not the marquee speaker anymore at conventions, there's still at every election, there's the idea that like, if we need to win, we should not be trying to kind of shore up marginalized people, but instead the solution to the Democrats winning office is to go after moderate suburbanites. And that's what happened in 2018. And I very much see that that's the way that the party seems to be turning right now.
Well, they seem to be, yeah, I mean, it's the whole conversation about means testing the student loan debt. They are trying to appeal to that constituency that you talk about there, and that this is Biden's political ideology. And I think, as you say, culturally we've moved on, and COVID, I think, was the death nail for it in terms of, anybody a little bit younger and who's voting Democratic. But Biden is still very much committed to that, or he knows no other way, really.
Yeah, and I think he there's some level of like, we need to do more, because I think there are two things going on. I think absolutely, like, one piece is that unlike the 90s, you do actually have a powerful left wing pushing back in a way that there was just that voice was absent for a number of reasons in the 90s. But I think what's important is that Biden was a founding member of the DLC, and I think he's less ideological in many ways than Bill Clinton was. But a lot of the people who are his senior advisors are people like Bruce Reed, Gene Sperling, who were all heavily invested in this approach. And so there's a question of like that maintaining, that affecting policy in various different ways. And always, I think, taking those approaches of like, we need to, both in terms of like, that's the right approach, but also this is the way to win for us to win and maintain power.
I just want to touch on that dichotomy you just talked about. You have an ideological element that, the Bruce Reeds, and then you have this sort of like political strategic one. What's the sequencing there? I mean, obviously, like, if I have this ideology, I'm going to seek out consultants who are going to say, like, actually, strategically, this meshes, right? Like, do we ever see a break? In other words, could we make an assessment right now that the White House is full of, because I think that, I think Joe Biden is, marginally relevant to relative to, honestly, to the people that he's surrounded himself with, or who have, accrued. And so, like, Bruce Reed and one or two other advisors may be just as important, on some level, depending on who's countering them in the White House. I think there's an argument right now about student debt that probably plays this out. And you have both the policy people and the ideologues and the political people who are talking about how this is going to impact the politics. How much of that distinction is there through this story? And is there a sense that one of those cohorts can exist without the other? I mean, because I think we're sort of probably still have more of those people who believe this stuff politically and don't ideologically are not as married to it, or may not be, but it's irrelevant because they're mercenaries on some level, and they've found a way that they make their money with this political advice, as opposed to these ideologues, which I think at this point has to be largely, like just completely bankrupt. I mean, whether it's like the Gates Foundation, Rand Corporation saying like, your whole school choice, your whole school program was a disaster. You don't have the Arnie Duncans anymore. You have them out. You don't have the Cass Sunsteins in this administration. It seems like the political people, for the large part, are still there, but not necessarily the ideologues.
Yeah, I think that that's right. And so it's an interesting point, because of that, with that dimension. And I do think some people like Bruce Reed and Gene Sperling have shown some capacity for change, but they're not hardcore going after the kinds of programs that they did in the 1990s. And so a recognition that that's not sort of suited for the moment. But it is an issue of like, for genuinely trying to combat inequality, that canceling student debt would be a really critical way to get there. So if you actually believe in policies that want to achieve those results, that is how you go about it. And we've seen real limitations of doing that. And so I do think that there is this place of particular kinds of political strategists making decisions. And I think I think the other thing that's different about the 90s, and I will go back to my point of like, as I said, I started out saying like the Republicans don't matter, but like, I do think they do matter. I mean, I think that what's happened, the Republican Party has changed so dramatically in many ways since the 1990s, that is a force to contend with too. And I think they're very afraid of that. And very afraid of kind of what the Republicans look like, even though in many ways that like you would think in some ways opening up the fact that there's no potential for bipartisan cooperation could actually lead to some programs. And something like student debt, they don't need to go through Congress for. So it's like it is a thing of like, this is not appealing to our perceived white suburbanite who we need to maintain Congress, and so therefore we're not going to do it.
Lily Geismer, Associate Professor of History at Claremont McKenna College. The book is Left Behind: The Democrats' Failed Attempt to Solve Inequality. We will put a link to that at majority.fm. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks.
Same here.
Let me read this IM. This just popped up.
Okay.
And it's from Smooth Jizz Trumpet, which is appropriate for the quality of this comment. Why are you just raining down hell on Democrats, Sam? There are two parties, and one is a theocratic, fascistic one. Why suppress potential Democratic voters? Unreal. All right. First off, let me start with the first sentence. Why are you just raining down hell on Democrats? I don't think we're raining down hell on Democrats.
Someone else should write in and talk about how we just need to come to terms with the fact that the Democrats are trying to lose on purpose.
Well,
I can't really like decide which way
the
show is biased.
I just want to address this one here.
Yeah.
We're not raining hell down on Democrats, A. Okay, but I understand the need for hyperbole in that. We're also not just doing anything. At the beginning of this show, we were pretty aggressive in talking about the Republican-controlled Supreme Court. I don't know if you've seen any of the other 250 shows that we've done this year in the past, 365 days, or frankly, any of the other shows for 12 years. The idea that the Republican Party's theocratic, fascistic one, I would point you to my 2006 book called FUBAR, America's Right-Wing Nightmare, where I had, with Steve and Cheryl, in a attempted humorous way, to say, this is what's happening with the Republican Party. So the idea, I'm not in any way not on board or aware of the idea of the Republican Party as a theocratic one. But the idea also that we're suppressing potential Democratic voters, what the eye is just, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind.
This is a sentiment that's going around, though. I had somebody banned in the chat, not with that name. I think the name was Daniel, but they said we were having a wine and cheese party, and that you two plus Lily, were going to deliver the election for the GOP.
Yeah, that's insane.
Wine and cheese party sounds nice.
Because anybody who has the limited intelligence to look at the critique of the Democrats through the 90s and into this century and decide I should vote for Republicans does not have the intelligence to find the show in the first place.
Yeah.
So you're wrong. Yeah. Two things can be simultaneously true. One, I would never vote for Republicans because they are insane. They are theocratic, fascistic. They have one solitary agenda, which is to suppress a huge swath of the American public. And then the other thing is that in many respects, the Democratic Party has failed to live up to its potential role as a party that could deliver social change, justice, and equality, economic equality. Those two themes have been consistent on this program for 18 years. And I challenge anyone to argue otherwise. I have always said over the course of these 18 years, I don't care about the Democratic Party other than it is the best option that we have in our limited options to inhibit Republicans and to provide the type of social change and economic change that I want. And so, if you can't grasp those two ideas, which are not contradictory, my suggestion to you is don't watch this show because it's going to blow your mind in such a way that it might ultimately hurt your synapses.
Dems are trash often, and a lot of times you should vote for them anyway, and most of the time, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, you have two choices more often than not. On a local level, it's conceivable also in some congressional races, you may have a viable third option, and I will say that viable third option, if they're good, they're going to end up caucusing with the Democrats anyways, because they're not going to caucus with the Republicans.
And they're at least not going to spend their entire campaign shitting on people who vote Democrat for harm reduction purposes.
Right. And so I think, I don't even know, I won't address this on a regular basis, but, every now and then people need to need a new, we need to sort of refresh people's memories. But it is quite clear to me that we need a different democratic leadership. And one of the ways that you can achieve that is by voting for some of the younger, more reformist-minded Democrats. Are they going to be perfect? No. Because that only happens in fairy tales and Disney movies. It's grown-up time.
Like that's for me as a North Dakotan. Like you're expecting the Democrat to not be exciting. Like I don't know. It maybe I've been spoiled that way to not expect much from electoral politics, but also not to like. I think the people that want to like abstain and act like if we abstain once, that will solve it are also putting too much hope in electoral politics.
They're insane.
Yeah,
they're insane. And you know what is the way you change people's mind about that is say 2016, 2004, 2010. I mean, it's just going on and on. Like anybody who's like of voting age has seen perfect examples of that failure. And the best part is, 2016 was supposed to be that one of those. I'm going to abstain and teach the Democrats a lesson. Democrats lose, I didn't have anything to do with it.
Don't look at me.
Don't look at me. Like, wait a second. That was your plan. Why are you even in what?
That was your moment to say, okay,
I
now
did
you
this.
listen to
Yeah,
us.
exactly. But the bottom line is like, that's not the way it works. No. That's not the way it works. You don't teach them a lesson. You build power that takes them over. That's it. It's not like I taught them a lesson.
They wanted a shortcut.
Oh, they didn't vote for us. We better do Medicare for all now.
Yeah. Oh, God. Might I recommend interviewing Amain Badhaso, who's running against Betty McCollum in Minnesota? Seems like a solid progressive. Will you put that down on the list too? We had someone else too from California. All right, folks, just a reminder, we are now 6 days away, 6 days away from our live Boston show.
I know.
If you're gonna go, now is the time to buy your ticket. Majority live. Still a couple of tickets left.
And it's supposed to be gorgeous
in
Boston. Gorgeous.
Walk down
70s and 80s.
Jeez, I can't even remember. I forgot the name of the river off of Starro Drive.
Isn't it the Charles?
Yeah, Charles River. You can walk down to Charles River. Maybe you walk down there, and then you walk down to the Boston Common. Maybe go on a swan boat. After you get off the swan boat, you go over to the Wilbur, watch the show, come back out. It'll still be a beautiful day. You can hang out at the Common, go back on the swan boat. And I don't know if they still have that duck boat now, that obnoxious like amphibian vehicle. Do they still have
Does it
those?
quack?
No, it just like it walks. They drive into the water and then they drive out. I don't know. You could do that too, and then go see if you can find the Cheers bar. Yeah. Majority Live. Also, amquickie.com. Check it out, folks. It's our daily news blast. You get top stories of the day and a number every morning in your email box. What else we got going? Become a member. It is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Just a reminder, if you're a member, you want to watch the Fun Half live, your YouTube should automatically populate, and we put a link in the description just in case. And if you're a member and you're having trouble finding the YouTube, you go sign in to the site at majority.fm, or just look at your member feed that you get on your app and click on the description in there, and that will take you to the YouTube as well. So it's in the majority.fm site. Right at the top of that day's post will be the link. Matt! Rob from Dedham says the Cheers bar is horrible. Awful recommend. Oh, yeah, no, it's... I don't know. Do people even still go to that? I mean, Cheers was like 80 years ago.
Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name.
Yeah, they don't. It's just a...
I want to go
you go on the Freedom Trail. You go to Quincy Market.
I'm looking for dispensary recommendations also.
Faneuil Hall.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Faneuil Hall, Quincy Market, same place. Go down there, get some chowder from Legal Seafood or some clams on the half shell. Matt, what book are you going to listen to the audio version of as you walk around Boston?
I haven't actually even thought about that. Probably maybe some
Revolutionary War
the
stuff.
Cemetery
Father
down there.
stuff.
You're gonna follow the Freedom Trail.
Yeah, there's a couple trails apparently. There's the Red Line one, and then there's another like more based one. Apparently, people tell me about.
Go to Chinatown, the former red light district area down there.
Ooh, that'd be fun. I did get a new Celtics hat.
Newbury Comics. You could probably bought a Celtics hat in Boston too.
Yeah, but you don't know if you're gonna run out of time or something.
Yep. Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian media universe?
So if you want to see how people build power outside of the Democrats, it's not like Tulsi Gabbard or the Boogaloo Boys, as some people like to suggest. I would recommend our interview on Left Reckoning with Robin Wansley, who's an independent socialist on city council in Minneapolis. Also, we talked with Adam and Jacob from the Valley Labor Report for patrons, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, about the Alabama governor's race, where Tim James is primarying Kim Ivey, and he got the union workers, the mine workers support there, basically because the Alabama Democrats are nowhere to be seen, which is a big problem. So Tim James can go into a union hall and say a couple words about the mine workers, and then do about 30 minutes on CRT. It's a problem that there's not a active Democratic Party down there. So we talked with them about how they're going to have to probably vote in the primary of the GOP because there's not really anything going on with the Democrats. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get access to that conversation.
All right, we'll head to the fun half. Just one more IM. Slappy Tubbs, you say the leaked SCOTUS opinion is to shore up the wavering right-wingers on the bench, but have you considered that maybe it was leaked to signal to state legislatures to fire up and get ready to pass laws to ban abortion as soon as the decision is made in June? They were already doing this. They were already doing it. They don't need that extra 2 months. They were already doing it. Yes, it was called the combat zone. That's right. All right, folks. See you in the fun half.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second. Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No,
Women's... Stop talking for a second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is it?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go throw up.
Libertarians.
They're so stupid, though.
Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering.
I believe 96, I want to say. 857-210-3501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
6, 5, 4, $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
You call it satire. Sam goes to satire.
On top of it all, my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the week being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Love you, bye.
Love you. Bye-bye. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vegalind on the fun half of the show. I was stumbling over, like, I sensed you having, like, trying to, like, wolf down that granola
Cliff
bar.
bar, yeah.
And so I tripped up over it.
Right, it's my fault.
Local 153. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm saying that's what inspired me.
No, I
to
get
not
it.
be able to I could actually like sense your trouble with the granola bar.
It reminded me I was at the movies with my friend, and she almost knocked over the popcorn. So when we were leaving, so I was trying to catch it, and then I knocked over our plate of French fries all over onto a woman's bag, and I was
Nice.
so flustered with ketchup on it too that I blamed her. I was like, if you hadn't, as we were walking out, if you hadn't tried to spill that or almost spilled that popcorn, I wouldn't have had to overcompensate. And she was like, are you really blaming me for this? So that's what you did just then.
I don't think I did. I think you're just trying to make yourself feel better for blaming your friend for dumping the fries on that lady's pocketbook.
I was flustered.
Local 153. Sam, you and Greg Fitzsimmons are two of my favorite podcasters. I noticed you have a lot of the same friends. Thought he might be a good Friday guest. Greg and I were friends back in the day in New York City. I think he was also in Boston, too. I think I tried to get him on at one point years ago. And I don't know what happened with that. But I remember when he had a floor that he was he was trying to re-poly or something, and our mutual friend Ross Broccoli at the time did it, and Ross had an interesting theory about DIY projects, and that it would be helped significantly if he wasn't completely sober when he did them. And that didn't work out so well with the polying the floor. Yeah, it's a little story. All right, so more and more examples. We have Mitch McConnell coming out and saying, we're open to a federal ban. Not going to promise it. Probably won't get rid of the filibuster to do so.
Probably,
but who knows? And of course, here is Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves. And what comes next after? I mean, because in Mississippi, abortion's going to be completely banned. So where do they go next? Well, they must be completely satisfied with this. They'll be done because it's only about abortion. It's not about controlling women's bodies. It's not about making sure that women go back into the kitchen. This is not
It's just about stopping murder.
This is not about some type of fundamentalist vision of where women get relegated back to being second-class citizens in this country. It's not about that. That's why we would never consider anything else.
It's about compromise.
Yes, it's not. This is not about making women suffer consequences if they decide to do the dirty. No. Well, maybe it is.
All we have is a leaked draft. We don't have a final.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I
agree
say on the matter.
But just to be clear, the state of Mississippi, you're not going to then target IUD or Plan B, which are methods of birth control that might not allow a fertilized egg to be implanted. And this is not a theoretical construct. This is not the state of Louisiana, which I recognize is a neighboring state, not your state. I mean, they're talking about not only criminally charging girls and women who get abortions as being committing homicide, but they're also talking about defining the moment of conception as fertilization, which would theoretically, if this were to become the law of Louisiana, and it is not yet, mean that murder, if you use an IUD, you are committing murder theoretically. So it's not, I'm not making this up. These are the conversations going on in legislatures in your area. But so just to be clear, you have no intention of seeking to ban IUDs or Plan B?
No intention?
That is not what we're focused on at this time. We're focused on looking at see what the court allows for. The bill that is before the court is a 15-week ban. We believe that the overturning of Roe is the correct decision by the court, and so in Mississippi we don't have laws on the books that would lead to arresting individuals or anything along those lines.
You mean not arresting girls or women, but you would arrest doctors?
Well, certainly, I don't think that that you're going to see doctors performing abortions if we have a state statute which says that they're not allowable except for those exceptions that we've mentioned earlier.
We don't need to go any further on this because, of course, when we did when we passed the law that said you can't steal a car, everybody was like, we're not going to steal a car.
No follow-up on no intention. I mean, I'm sorry, to shoehorn freaking sports into this, but like a few weeks before they traded Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll said, we have no intention of trading Russell Wilson. It's almost like a joke in sports media. When you say no intention, it means you're going to do it. It means you're going to do it later on. You just don't want to tip your hand and give up your leverage, which is exactly what's happening in this situation.
This was even more explicit. They just said, at this time. In other words, like, we have so much on our plate. Like, listen, we're so busy restricting women's rights that we have to do one thing at a time. Come on, Jake. We gotta walk before we start to really full-on sprint.
Thanks for the follow-up, too, on that incredibly important point, by the way. And why was the question framed as, you don't have any intention of doing this, right? It makes it super easy, as opposed to like, yeah, we're just going to wait it out for a little bit longer and then we'll go after it.
And we should say that conversation that they're having in the Louisiana legislature, it's actually, they've passed it out of committee. And if anybody wants to take bets on whether that's going to go through.
It's also sort of like, you aren't going to go further than this. It sort of acknowledges like we're just going to accept what is being done.
Right.
IUDs, the reason they're targeting Plan B and IUDs in particular is because those are methods of contraception outside of the man's control. If a woman puts an IUD in herself, there's nothing a man can do in terms of control. He does not have the agency over the insemination because the IUD is going to block it. Same with Plan B, right? It takes away control from men in relationships, much more so than other methods that are more, transparent, but I'm sure they'll go after the pill eventually. Other methods of birth control that are less about the woman's agency directly. I mean, that it's just insane. They're really going to claim that like any method that attempts to block fertilization in and of itself, if the sperm is inside of the woman, is murder. That's what they're going to go with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, once that egg and that sperm touch, and that's not how you get pregnant. You need to embed this thing in the uterus. But, just the idea that we're talking about this now is already, this is what they're going to do. They're just going to keep going. This is sort of like the gish galloping of legislation, right? Gish gallop is the way that when you're in a debate, you throw out so many things that by the time the person has a chance to respond, there's 12 things that they got to respond to. I mean, this is also, just to be clear, also what, the Trump presidency was like. We're going to do so many egregious things in a day that you're not going to have time to talk about them.
Can't we just focus on this Roe thing? It's like, no, let's talk about all the hypotheticals that come after this Roe thing.
Right, because they're already onto it.
Yeah.
Which is why, like, this Roe conversation needed to happen 6 years ago. And it didn't. And here's where we're at. And 3 years from now, I mean, buckle up, folks. Get ready to, well, not get ready. I mean, I honestly think that, like, part of the problem with this, part of the problem that this leak effectively did was also make it hard to get people to protest now, right? Because it's like, well, we're not sure if this is actually going to be the ruling. So it freezes people who want to protest against it. Am I going out and protesting against about what? Like maybe something that's going to happen? That would have been the same thing 3 weeks ago.
It doesn't look like it's freezing people, though. They're outside of Kavanaugh's house.
100 people. But I mean, I think largely it's going to be very different when the actual ruling is coming down. I mean, if I had to guess right now, the major organizations that are looking into this are trying to keep their powder dry until the actual ruling comes, because That way you're not you're not protesting against something that is theoretical. Because I think like the idea that that Kavanaugh is going to change his mind with those protests, I think is wrong. I think the value of those protests, though, are to largely signal how angry people are and to get the Democrats to gear up towards this. But I don't think, Kavanaugh sat there, lied through his teeth during his hearing. There were people who were certainly protesting about the fact that he was, at the very least, lying about his assault at the time, lying about all sorts of things. And he's got the perfect right-wing mind. You protest me for being a sexual assaulter when I was a teen. You're
going to pay.
No, it's not even that. Before you get to that, it's like, this is unjust for me. This is unjust for me.
Yeah.
Because, look, I grew up in a society where teenage boys, if they did stuff, it didn't impact them later in life. And now I got to be held to account to what I did in high school.
Teenage white boys.
Yes, exactly. But for him, all teenage boys
are white boys.
There's
no teenage black boys because they're all men as soon as, and we should prosecute them as such.
And it doesn't even occur to him wait a second, if I had done that as a teenage black, there would be no law school. There would be nothing. And it's unjust. It's unjust to me. Self-aggrievement is the first place they go.
Yeah.
And we see it here.
I mean, so again, are masturbatory emissions, is that murder? Because the sperm should be seeking an egg at every single time, right?
Well,
to borrow from Al Woods or use it.
Yeah, I think that won't happen because of the nature of the masturbation.
Would Kavanaugh be against that? What so much for people's medical freedoms?
But I think
now we want to control what IUD gets or does not get inside of a woman's uterus.
I think you hit on it when you said it is a birth control that is controlled by the woman. And I think you're going to see, if you wanted to track on what is going to be outlawed, that's the way you look at it.
The pill, the man can throw it out. The man knows where it is. He can see it physically. The IUD, the man can't do anything about that. That's in the uterus unless,
I wouldn't be surprised.
There could be a really violent way to pull it out. But
I wouldn't be surprised if there's regulations about the pill. I wouldn't be surprised about that. I'm quite convinced they'll find a way. And here's why I think they'll come for the pill. They're already going to come for the IUD because the capacity for even the supposed most compassionate and reformed, and the most sort of least extreme Republicans, their capacity to justify any of these things is enormous because, of course, they have created these fundamentalist monsters. And I remind you, the history of Republicans and the fundamentalist right adopting the issue of abortion really was a surrogate for their anger at being forced to segregate or integrate, I should say. It came out of Bob Jones University having their tax status threatened because they wouldn't allow black and white students to date. So just know, their capacity to justify all of this is infinite. I give you Governor Asa Hutchinson, who is just beside himself with how hard it's going to be for victims of rape.
Governor, I want to go back to my question about those women. What would you say to those women who seek an abortion, who don't have the money to travel, who don't have the money to raise a child? What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, again, that's where your heart goes out to them. I've had to deal with those very difficult circumstances of rape and incest as governor, and it's difficult. And so you have to understand that. You have to provide services, and I believe that we want to increase the services for maternal health, to increase the services for adoption services as well. And so we want to invest in those areas that will help those women with very difficult...
Adoption services. So does Asa Hutchinson approve gay couples seeking those children immediately? Immediately. Right? If you're going to force women to have children, any couple that's loving in a relationship should be able to adopt a child, right? Is that the case?
Oh, my God. I would say everything he is suggesting as to what they're going to provide for services, they're not going to provide for services, period. It's
Thank
just
you
a
for
lie.
your thoughts and prayers for the victims of rape and incest.
Continue on with this. How much more is there?
Circumstances of the pregnancy. But secondly, I think to your point, the rape and incest exceptions will continue to be a part of the debate. Right now, we do not have rape and incest as exceptions under the Arkansas trigger law, but there's I think that will be a part of the debate.
Would you like to see those exceptions?
Those exceptions are important. Yes, I expressed whenever I signed the law that I would prefer the rape and incest exceptions to be in there. And even though we have the trigger law, I expect those exceptions to be a significant part of the debate in the future, even though we're going to immediately go to restrict abortions in the exceptions, with the exception of the life of the mother in danger.
Why do you?
You know what? Do away with the rape and incest exception. Honestly, I don't even want to concede that to them, because when you make an exception for rape or incest, you continue to stigmatize abortion. It's only acceptable in this case of extreme brutality. And so every other woman that's seeking it outside of these narrow sets of horrible circumstances is immoral. So it just feeds into the framing. Stop asking about exceptions for rape and incest. They're not interested in it. He's going to say on cable, I wish in theory, but I still signed the bill anyway, that they'd have these exceptions. It's impossible to enforce. All it's there to do is to make women who seek abortions seem like immoral women who are sexually promiscuous, basically. I don't even want to entertain the conversation anymore. I understand why liberals want to do it, because it highlights their brutality, but it's the wrong path to go down.
And also in practice, let's be clear of what happens in practice in this instance, right? Like you need to prove that you've been raped.
Yeah.
Like you need to prove that, like,
it doesn't happen.
Where's the rapist?
Yeah, our great justice system.
Where's the justice system? Like, you know, how many months is it going to take until the rape is proved? This is, I mean, like Emma's saying, this is BS. It's not even real.
Yeah.
It's not even real. The exception for rape or incest. How long do you have to prove it? Incest. Like, okay, I'm a 15-year-old girl who has been impregnated by my uncle or my father. And so I am going to announce this, because unlike every other instance of incest that takes place, I happen to be, have the emotional support to come out and announce that I have been raped by a family member, and also have the emotional support to go and announce this publicly so that I can prove to the court that I have been sexually that I have been raped by a family member. And of course, I've got to do this all rather quickly because there's a clock on this. And the idea that, like, we'll also offer, rape victims, it's not just a question of, like, we're going much further than just sympathy. We're going to tell you there's a debate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Feel a lot better about
we should
that.
know that we've sent you a debate. It's along with the muffin basket that we send you with every forced pregnancy.
And our heart that went out to you.
And our heart has gone out to you.
I feel his heart.
We should talk about since he mentioned abortion, the Amy Coney Barrettness of this all. Just from the opinion noted, a woman who puts her newborn up for adoption today has little reason to fear that the baby will not find a suitable home. Tucked into a footnote for that statement was a telling citation from a 2008 CDC report that found nearly 1 million women were seeking to adopt children in 2002, i.e. they were in demand for a child, whereas the domestic supply of infants relinquished at birth or within the first month of life and available to be adopted had become virtually non-existent. And apparently, like, that's consistent with judgments passed by Coney Barrett before. And it's, I mean, I was talking to people, like, that really freaks people out. I think that should be emphasized a little bit more, that part of this is, like, they're trying to make people carry their pregnancies to term so they can give them up for adoption.
There's, I read a great thread on this, and I'll talk about this later, but we have seen examples in this country of immigrant children during the Trump administration stolen from their parents and given to basically religious fundamentalists. I mean, this is, I know it's hyperbole, and I know there's a lot of criticism to, like, be using Handmaid's Tale references, but not every piece of fiction is necessarily exactly the way it plays out in reality. But I got news for you. The structure of this is going to be very, very similar. When they pass that ban, which is only contingent upon them having the same majority that Democrats had when they passed the ACA for 2 years. Democrats get that majority. They pass a necessary but insufficient health care reform bill. When Republicans get that type of majority, they will pass a federal ban on abortion. I don't know if they'll stop there. They will pass a federal ban on abortion. And any exception for the life of the mother or rape, understand what that means in practice. For rape, it means that a rape victim needs to prove that they've been raped. They need to go through this entire process before they get their, permission slip to end the pregnancy. And let's also be clear on what constitutes the health of the mother. You heard Tate Reeves, is that his name, from Mississippi, say, "Oh, we're going to pass this ban. We're not going to lock up any doctors because they're going to know not to perform an abortion because we did it." Okay, so you're a doctor, and you know that the law says you go to jail if you perform an abortion, except, of course, in the context of rape. Well, you got to wait for your permission slip from the court system and all the legal proceedings that would exist to prove that a woman's been raped. What decision do you make about the life of the mother? This is not, there's no a siren that goes off on people's heads where they're like, my life is in jeopardy. It is a subjective medical call made by a doctor. And now that decision-making process is the doctor looking at these different elements. Okay, in 20% of these, let's say, assume for the moment the doctor has an encyclopedic computerized brain. 20% of these situations, the mother dies. Is that sufficient? 30%, 40%, 50%, 8%, 2%. Where's the cutoff? Now, of course, the doctor has to make this subjective determination. On one hand, now it is, we need to terminate this pregnancy. And I'm weighing your life, which I think there's a 20% chance, 8% chance, 40% chance, 60% chance that you will die if we do not terminate this pregnancy, against this life of the fetus.
And my fear that I'll be targeted.
Well, now that's the way it is today. But in a matter of months, that doctor, if women are given the opportunity to have an abortion, if it means their life, That doctor now has to add one more element into that. Do I want to go to jail for a year or 2 or 3 or 10 or whatever? And to think that that's not going to weigh in their decision-making process. I mean, people, this has all been so theoretical and hypothetical that people have really not worked through the way this is going to work out. It's going to be, no one in this country really has a sense, I think, of what this is going to really be like. And I will tell you, abortion was not a constitutional right prior to 1973. This time around, it is going to be these bans are going to be far more onerous because there is a massive political incentive for these right-wingers to hold up, basically scalps in this instance. It is going to be very, very different. Dimesh, if heart surgery was illegal, would doctors still do it? Some would. Yeah, maybe. Maybe.
Well, yeah, but heart surgery, this is not... A surgical abortion is one of the safest procedures right now surgically that you can get in the United States. So, and there's also, if you catch it early enough, there are pill options. So that's where I think a lot of this is going to go under the table. Women ordering pills off the internet.
Oh yeah, I think there's going to be, without a doubt, there's going to be black market set up. And then maybe black markets for IUDs.
I'm already starting to think about contingency plans for 2024.
And what the important thing on that is accept jury duty and look up the concept jury nullification. And vote to acquit any woman who is obviously buying that sort of product through the mail.
Calling from a 781 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, hey, my name's Chris.
Back off your phone, Chris.
First time caller.
Chris, Chris, back off your phone just a little bit. It's getting a little staticky.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, how's that?
That's better. But make sure you back off a little
All
more.
right. A little more. Okay. Actually, why don't I turn off? All right. Is that good?
Yep, much better.
Perfect. Okay. I just wanted to devote just a tiny bit of attention to the elections happening right now in the Philippines, because I haven't heard other leftist spaces talking about it in the past couple of weeks. If you know anything about Filipino politics, you probably heard of Duterte. Well, he's stepping down. The current frontrunner for the election is a guy named Bongbong Marcos, which is an objectively funny name. But he's the son of Ferdinand Marcos, who you may know was the president turned dictator of the Philippines from 65 to 85 or thereabouts.
Yep.
And basically Yep. Yeah, and basically his entire campaign has been this very monumental social media effort to whitewash or really just erase the entire legacy of Ferdinand Marcos, which has been really effective. So I'm talking to some cousins back home who are, lived through the regime and were imprisoned and tortured for participating in political protests back in the day. And I have other cousins who are dismissing their entire story as Western propaganda, which is weird because Marcos himself was largely propped up and
he was very much embraced.
He
was very much embraced. I guess I can't remember what era was that. Was that Reagan or Clinton era? I mean, Imelda would have like
Reagan.
glowing news pieces about how many shoes she owned.
Yeah. Anyway, that's really all. I just wanted to.
All right, we'll look into maybe getting a guest on about that. Appreciate the call.
Yeah, because the election is happening today.
Oh, it is. All right.
Left is best.
Yeah,
right, it's happening right now.
All right.
wow.
Well, we will. Maybe we'll get a guest to just give us a sense of what's going on.
Yeah.
All right. Appreciate
left is best, and mabuhay ang Pilipinas.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know that we were gonna impact the outcome of the Filipino election, as it were. But
I'm interested to learn about it. Yeah.
One last thing on the abortion thing. Like I say, I don't think that there really is that we are even close to understanding what's going to happen when this abortion ban takes place. And I don't think that the vast majority of Americans have any sense of just how far the Republicans in this court are going to go. They're going to go far. They're going to outlaw certain types of contraception without a doubt. They're going to...
and as we said before, they're first going to target IUDs, morning after pills, ones that allow the woman to, nullify it. They have the most freedom individually in that, because the IUD, you don't know if it's in there. The woman has complete control, and they could just go to the drugstore and get the morning after pill.
And again, the reason why they're going to do this is not because they care about the babies. A fertilized egg is not a person. It is less of a life than your common houseplant at that point. Okay? Let's be clear about that. And if you want a good understanding of what's behind this, sometimes you just got to go to the source. I mean, this is, again, there is a fundamentalist vision about where women should be. You don't necessarily have to be a fundamentalist Christian to believe this, and not all of them necessarily do. I'm sure some of them are good people. But here's a guy standing out in front of St. Patrick's Church. This video claims that the guy is from the New York Fire Department. We can't confirm that. He's wearing a New York Fire Department t-shirt, but, I don't know. You can get that from you.
Buy those on the street.
You can buy those on the street.
Yeah, it's largely...
You could be a fan.
I don't think that affects the story whatsoever.
No, it doesn't affect the story, because I don't think, the fire department doesn't have any more say over this than others. It is a mentality that I think is a perfect example of what is going on in the mind of a lot of conservatives. Here is protesters protesting outside of St. Patrick's Church, and listen to what this guy has to say.
The church, not the state. The people must decide
I'm the people. I'm the people. I am the people. The people have decided. The court has decided. You lose. You have no choice. Not your body, not your choice. Your body is mine, and you're having a baby.
Your body is mine, and you're having a baby. Not, hey guys, you don't want to be involved in murder. Hey guys, a fetus is a person who deserves rights.
We've saved lives.
Yeah, no, it is. That's right. We control your body now.
Power trip time.
Yes. This is what we're talking about. We have the authority over you.
It's about control.
Totally.
That's what this is. I mean, that's all you need to see. It's can't believe he said it out loud. But that's what this emboldens, right? I would not be shocked, and by not be shocked, now I'm convinced that it's going to happen. There's going to be an increase in violence against women in these states immediately. It's a green light. Your body is mine. I can impregnate you. I can rape you. I can beat you up. You don't have agency. I keep using that word, but that's really how what it is.
That's what that guy's yelling.
Yeah. He's being explicit.
That guy's not yelling. You got to protect you got to protect the babies. That's not what he's yelling.
Hashtag save the children.
Yeah, it's not what he's yelling.
Wonder what that guy thought about, I don't know, medical freedom for vaccines or something like that. Compare that to how he feels about women's right to their own health care.
Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, it's Ronald Reagan.
Oh, hello, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, I just wanted to change it up and share a little gripe I have about the show.
Okay, great. I'm really shocked.
So, life and time, as we know it, is finite, right?
Yeah.
We all live a certain number of days and hours and minutes and seconds, and that's all that we have. And
Life is finite. I'm
and
not
the
sure
show-
that time is finite, but go ahead.
And the show is also finite. Even if you went 7 days a week, 365, 24 hours a day, there's only so many things you can talk about.
Correct.
And so you have to make choices.
Yep.
Editorial choices.
Yep.
And it just seems like lately you're giving a lot of time to people who criticize how you spend your time. And I kind of feel like that's a waste of time to keep, you keep reading these IMs about how you shouldn't be talking about this and you shouldn't be talking about that. And then you respond in some like long drawn out soliloquy about, trying to prove them wrong about all the things that you've done and the interviews that you do. And it just seems like that's a waste of time. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be talking about things that I care about instead.
Well, what things do you care about that I can talk about? I mean, I feel actually, hold on, I have something prepared here just in case you called in with something like this to list all the things that I talk about that you care about. I can't find the list.
Well, I mean, just pretty much.
Don't you
anything
have?
but that.
Weren't you going to call in about some like weird stuff that's happening with the immigration courts? Or you're not going to do that?
Oh yeah, do you want to hear about that?
Well, you spent all this time, and this is my time for critiquing you. You called in to critique something that I know you did it, form, function. I get the whole thing. What about the immigration stuff?
Yeah, so there's like over 1.5 million cases in removal proceedings in the immigration court, and the Biden administration has decided that what they're going to do to try and clear the docket is aggressively file motions to dismiss in almost all the cases, which would render a lot of these people undocumented. And a lot of people who are in removal proceedings have employment authorization by virtue of the fact that they have a pending application before the court. And so what ICE is actually doing is pushing a lot of people into the shadows just in order to make it look like they're accomplishing something. And that includes people who have good bona fide asylum claims, people who came 5, 6, 7 years ago. They're finally coming up for their final hearing, and ICE is trying to dismiss their case. And basically, yeah, it's really, really
So wait,
weird.
Who's bringing the case? Like, who's the plaintiff and who's the defendant in this situation?
Yeah, so the undocumented immigrants, or the immigrants, are considered the respondents. And so if you came to the border to seek asylum, they put you in removal proceedings, and that's where you file your application. If you're here undocumented and you got picked up by ICE in some sort of operation or whatever, you end up in removal proceedings, where there's certain defenses that you can present to actually win papers. And for some people, that's the only way they have to get papers is in removal proceedings. And so for some people who don't have good defenses to removal, like having their case dismissed so they can go back to the shadows is, arguably better than the alternative, which would be finishing the case and being ordered removed. But it's just been really, really weird because we've had cases coming up, like really strong asylum cases or really strong other types of removal defenses. And ICE is coming to us and saying, we're filing a unilateral motion to dismiss. We no longer want to pursue removal against you. And that would just mean that they would lose their application and they would have nothing to show for it.
And so what do they do at that point? Can they apply for something, or is it just they're in this like limbo?
So for asylum seekers, what they're telling them to do is to reapply for asylum with the asylum office. So if you're not in removal proceedings, you can just apply for asylum with the asylum office. But the asylum office also has like a 7, 8, 9 year backlog. And so they're taking people who've been waiting for 5 or 6 years for their final hearing so that the judge can rule on their asylum application. And they're saying, in order to make it look like there's nothing going on in court and we're processing these cases, you should, we're going to get rid of your application completely.
And
you should start over with some other part of the government. And it's really dumb for everyone. It's dumb for us, for our clients. And also, I mean, not that I care that much about ICE and their, their job, but it's also dumb for them to do that when there's alternatives. There's things that they could do to put cases on hold or to allow people to maintain their employment authorization so that ICE maintains some sort of enforcement interest in the case. But it's literally just trying to make it look like everything is being resolved.
If I've put in an application to the asylum office, do I get that status that allows me to work in the meantime? Do I have the same sort of like protection as I would have like an ongoing proceeding?
Right. So you can get a work permit after 6 months, but it's just really weird. And I've got a case coming up in a couple of weeks, and they move to dismiss, and it's a very straightforward, like really strong case. And I tried to get them to agree to release, because they're also allowed to do that. They can stipulate and say, yeah, we think that you've met your burden. And they're just saying no. And if we try and fight back against dismissal, then they're coming really hard at trial. Like they're basically punishing people for not taking dismissal, which is it's the whole thing is really weird and pretty stupid way to handle the backlog. But anyhow, that's what's going on with immigration, plus just not fixing any of the other problems that are going on. So it's pretty cool.
Thanks for the call.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Judy Ruliani, my dad died 12 years into our immigration process. It was tossed out when he died. Our family was left in the shadows, as Ray Gunn says.
I'm so sorry.
Women's reporting. Sam, have you noticed how most of your callers last few days have not been about abortion, and especially not women? What are your plans to bring more women to the fold of the show? It is majority report only if you include women.
Well, I include in my contract that I'd be the only full-time woman on staff here.
But I don't even know what it is. I can't control who calls into the show. Yeah. I look at a number. I don't know who it is.
Also, the issue is just there's not a ton of women, unfortunately, in terms of the analytics, watch a lot of political media, is my understanding. And I think that that's partly, just an issue with, well, I don't know. The women are, I think, discouraged from participating in political discourse because it's perceived as like aggressive and not becoming of, or attractive. It's like you're being too aggressive. So that's, I think, sometimes why the audience is a bit more male.
I'm curious as to what your plan would be. I feel
like encouraging our female listeners who have a perspective to call in is probably the best we can do.
Yes. Please do. Let's go to the phones. 551 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Well, how fortuitous, Sam, that I'm the next call. It's A Square.
A Square. How are you? Thanks for calling in.
Well, yes, to the female perspective. This is unbelievable, Sam. When you said 18 years, I was thinking, I can't believe this. And Emma, your point is so well taken by a lot of boomer women that we thought that if we play this game with these exceptions and this view of abortion, it was going to get us anywhere. And it's just, I am done with the exceptions too. This concept that it's this big morality play is just part of our undoing. And Sam, is it me, or was I was just so surprised at some of the positions that Russ Fungo took. I don't know. I
don't
just
understand. I share your surprise. I just think that, like, I don't know. I honestly I don't understand it. I don't understand what needs to happen before this becomes more clear as to what the dynamic is. I don't know.
And the consequences of it all. I mean, this is not about. We've known all along this was never about abortion.
Yep.
White male patriarchy. And of course, thank you for bringing up the case of the exceptions. What was it? The Jerry Falwell University?
Yeah, Bob Jones University.
Thank you. It's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable to me. Very, very depressing. I just, like I said in my I Am a Friday, all we could do is try to go out there and protest and try to change the leadership of this Democratic Party. But here's one more thing that I want to leave everybody with. This is not the first time the Supreme Court does this. This is in your face. But when Roberts gutted the Civil Rights Act, he just found another way to do it. That was the project of his life. And these three judges, that is the project of their life.
Yep.
And
well said.
Thank you guys for, just doing this every day. Thank you.
Thanks, A Squared.
Thanks, A Squared.
Bye.
Female listener, I would love to call in, but I prefer to have Matt tell me to go F myself via IM rather than via phone call. Really cool. I'm a freaking woman ready to go to war for repro rights now. Today, fight the theocracy. Kathy from Cambridge, I am a woman and I watch, but I am shy.
That's okay. Maybe I should call in to the show.
Matt's 5 cheese sandwich. THC is a crap ton cheaper in Kittery, Maine dispensaries than Mass. All right, there we go.
Should we do this Meghan McCain?
Yeah, let's do this Meghan McCain thing. The fun half. We'll save the dumb thing for tomorrow.
Okay.
So I.
Where do we
say this?
Where do we start?
Let me just say this. The last thing in the world I would have imagined I would ever do on this program is tell people it's worth reading Steve Schmidt's Twitter feed from this past weekend or from any time.
I feel like we should start trying to fundraise from the Lincoln Project audience, just hearing you say that.
Yeah. Right? Someone clip that.
But I did recommend it to one or two of my friends just because...
I mean, you texted us about it over the weekend. Like, that's how much this moved you.
Yeah. The carnage involved was pretty enjoyable. And it started with a couple of days ago, reports came out that Meghan McCain's new memoir, Bad Republican, sold less than 300 copies.
I can't see this because I'm blocked by her, by the way.
Like, if you go and self-publish, you're going to sell more than 300 copies.
I feel like it's probably not ever been the case that an author we've had on, even like of an obscure academic press book, has sold fewer than that.
Yeah, we've had people on who have books that do one print because each book was like $175 or something because they're so academic. Let me put it this way. Who's the Caboose sold more than 300 copies on DVD? I think annually it still does on DVD. And Meghan got a little bit defensive. And so she tweeted out, Mediaite had reported on this. And then she wrote, Bad Republican came out at Audible.com 7 months ago, exclusively on Audible, where it hit as high as number 2 on the Audible bestseller list. So let's just be clear. Audible had a deal for exclusivity. They tend to promote these things because they laid out cash.
Yeah, like the front page.
Exactly. Like, I mean, it's like if you got to, like, I would be curious if there's anything that was exclusively on Audible that didn't hit number 2. And it was the top nonfiction title the week it came out.
I love the specificity
on Audible.
of this.
On Audible.
Yeah.
Which I love, but I mean, if you're Audible, you're probably not liking getting thrown under the bus here because it kind of looks like maybe you shouldn't do this exclusivity thing because it's going to tank your.
Or whoever's in charge of buying the exclusivity ones, maybe they don't have their finger on the pulse. Additionally, it has strong reviews, 4.4 stars and over 1,000 ratings. Okay, so
that's another like obscure poll.
That's all well and good. All right, and so. Then what happens? She writes this, and what's the next thing? What triggers this whole thing?
With Steve Schmidt. I'm still on the... okay, so he... Basically, when was she calling him a pedophile, which makes this a like scorched earth attack on him justified? Because that's the piece that I'm missing, right?
Something happened that set him off. And so he tweets out,
so that, just a warning, this is a vicious Twitter thread in which Steve Schmidt, former campaign manager for John McCain, tells...
Oh, well, you think it's that vicious just because that you have a good relationship with your parents. So Steve Schmidt comes out and says, I can explain this. Wait, do you have an answer?
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Bradley, what do you...
Yeah, so apparently in this whole scrum... Meghan liked a reply to Schmidt's tweet saying that he was being accused of running a pedo racket during the Trump administration.
Okay, so there we go. So then he goes...
But he responds and he goes, I can explain this. When I kicked Meghan McCain off of the 2008 McCain plane because of her outrageous behavior, I talked to her mom and explained what was happening and why. Cindy got weepy and said, quote, I just want to say I raised 2 good sons. And I said, everyone knows you did. Now, look.
Whoa.
I think it's clear that, right-wingers feel more pride in their male offspring. That's just the way it works in those type of households. But
it's in response to her getting kicked off the campaign plane.
Oh, yeah. No.
So it's pretty clear what's
what's
going down. Yeah.
And then Steve Schmidt says, number 2, my daughter was 3 at the time, and I made a promise to myself I would make sure my number 1 priority in life would be raising a child that never acted like Meghan McCain, a spoiled, rotten, entitled bully. She is graduating high school next week. Mission accomplished. Everyone who's ever worked with Meghan McCain, from ABC, The View, Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, and 1,000 others, have seen the unfiltered version of what the whole America has seen. That is why in a nation of 330 million people, 247 people have bought her book. Nothing new to learn. And then, of course, she likes this story about this tweet about Steve Schmidt being a pedo.
So that came after. So this was a preemptive, I'm going to talk about how your mother loves you least.
As your book fails.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, come on.
I respect it, honestly.
Honestly, I
don't
have total
respect it.
Steve
Schmidt's a scummy dude too.
Oh yeah, he's definitely a scummy. We're talking about the act, not the man.
Yeah.
The only reason why I have any disrespect for it is that this should have come years ago. Oh yeah. Before it was like in his financial best interests. But let me just say that since we're talking about, I just want to say that I am proud of Steve Schmidt for a solution that risks the imagination of a new kind of possibility. He was one of Howard Schultz's, campaign managers.
Yeah.
So he goes, Meghan McCain, here's the story of the dumbest decision of my life. I had met briefly with Palin the night before, along with another top staffer. We agreed that and now I think like not Sarah Palin, Meghan McCain has blamed Steve Schmidt for Palin being on and sullying John McCain. And this I appreciate even more. Like, I think it's nice to know that Meghan McCain's mom doesn't love her and regrets.
On Mother's Day, he posted this tweet. He posted this tweet on Mother's Day.
I would imagine Cindy McCain finally says, I'm done having to live the lie. So, so Meghan McCain blames Steve Schmidt for tarnishing her father's wonderful reputation by forcing Sarah Palin on the ticket. Now, listen, everybody not everybody knows, but John McCain deserves every single bit of responsibility for Sarah Palin. Never got the credit he deserved for basically giving birth to baby Trump in the form of Sarah Palin. And so Meghan McCain, likes this thing. Let's go. So this is the one that's more accurate. So go up to number one, go up. So Meghan McCain has been trying to have a conversation with me for almost 14 years. Once again, today she called me a pedophile. It's slander, it's disgusting, it's untrue, and it says everything about her. Here she is liking the tweet of a far-right liar and a piece of filth. Scroll down. After 14 years, he says, of abuse and attacks, today is the I decide to respond. I'm happy to keep the story going after this thread. It only gets better.
Because he did like a few threads. I'm trying to wrangle all of them.
Yeah, it's tough. And he goes, I was the first adult that Meghan McCain ever counted that she heard the word no from. I told her she was
Totally
unimportant,
believable.
that the presidential election wasn't about her. I left the tarmac when she didn't make the plane because I explained to her the 5,000 people who were waiting to see her father speak and took the time it deserved to have him show up on time that way. John McCain, that was the way John McCain saw it. He was appalled by Meghan McCain's conduct on the campaign, appalled and embarrassed. The tantrums were beyond anything I have ever witnessed from any other human being. There were epic meltdowns that would test the range of Meryl Streep, Kate Winslet, Jodie Foster, and Anne Hathaway on their best
Don't
days.
pull them into this.
Steve, yeah.
He doesn't tag him, at least. She goes on to just basically crap on Meghan McCain, and I think that's definitely worth.
So many adjectives. He's
Yes.
giving Glenn a run for his money.
The one I
But
liked
the best stuff here is, all right. Newsflash: Meghan McCain is a whiny, bratty, self-entitled, spoiled kid who really has,
A reflection on her parents too, that she was raised that way.
I mean, look, sometimes you never know how things are going, but let me just say this: one of the biggest, one of the most egregious things about all of this is that we don't have failed daughter as a part of our lexicon the way we do fail sons, and we should, because Meghan McCain, and she should get credit for that if that catches on. But then
the founding fail daughter.
Schmidt goes into a couple of different threads, one of which shows that John McCain wanted Sarah Palin because he was a coward, because he knew his election was up. And I'll tell you something, it was obvious at the time too. McCain knew he was going to lose, and he made the only bet he could, or at least that he thought he could. And that was Sarah Palin, and he didn't care who she was.
It was a deal with the deal with the base, with the devil, and I mean, Obama was always going to win in this, post-Bush fury.
And it showed the cowardice that John McCain had politically.
Yeah,
he was a political coward who would put his finger up in the air, regardless of what you think about him as a POW or whatnot. He'd put his finger up in the air, and he would go there. And to the extent that he was a maverick, that was all just a branding exercise. That was also completely rooted only in what was convenient at the time. And that's no different than any other politician, but he was venerated by people. So Schmidt goes on to talk about this, which is interesting. And Ari Berman And Mark Ames wrote a piece in The Nation about this in 2008, which got no attention at the time. It's getting more attention now. I had no interest whatsoever running a presidential campaign in 2008. One of my closest friends was running McCain's campaign, and John Weaver was the chief strategist. There were two factions in the campaign. There was a pro-democracy faction, and there was a pro-Russia faction. The pro-democracy faction was led by Weaver, and the pro-Russia faction was led by a Washington lobbyist who was in business with Paul Manafort.
Whoop.
Like Manafort, he had a Trump Tower residence. He was in charge of campaign finances and bankrupt the campaign through a series of unethical transactions and markups with Manafort and a company called 3EDC. The campaign was destroyed over a massive fight over John McCain's greatest blind spot. Willful or otherwise, Meghan McCain, this is the story of the man you call Uncle Rick. And it explains how we met. I'll attach a story from The Nation that I only read recently from 2008. It's spot on. Meghan McCain, your father tolerated his campaign chairman being in business and working for Putin through his association with, Yanukovych. Same as Trump.
I love the standalone tweet, same as Trump in all caps.
Yanukovych, as you probably have no idea, was Putin's puppet in Ukraine.
Yep.
The story of America corruption in Ukraine starts here. Starts in John McCain's operation, not Trump's. Meghan McCain, did you know your dad was taking on Oleg Deripaska's yacht in Montenegro for his 70th birthday by his top aide? It was a McCain guy, represented the interests of the Russian government in the Montenegro independence referendum. Weaver was aghast. This is why the campaign went kaboom in July of 2008, and your father went from front runner to middle seat on a Southwest flight with the National Press Corps gathered in New Hampshire waiting for him to drop out. This is when McCain called me and asked for his help. It's the opening scene of Game Change. And he goes on to talk about this. And people should read the story. But here is, do we know that this is not Photoshop?
Yes, because you can go on Megan's Instagram. There's another picture of her at John McCain's grave, and the book is propped against.
Now, this I think is somewhat cruel and unfair to Meghan McCain. She clearly posted a picture of her and her kid near her father's grave, which is, a solemn thing. She placed a copy of her book. I don't know if that's copy number 247 that's sold, or she got her own.
Did she sign it at least?
In front of his grave. Now, look, I imagine it's possible that you lose a parent and you're like, Dad, look at the book I wrote. Here it is.
I'm going to face it outward.
I'm going to face it outward so that you can see through it. You'll see the cover that way. Look at it through a mirror, Dad, and you'll see it the right way.
Actually, I'm seeing it backwards from behind.
But she posted this on Instagram, and I don't know. I guess if I was like, Dad, I wrote this book in honor of you. I want you to see it. Maybe I would feel it necessary to use it as a publicity still on my Instagram account. But I like to think that, like, if I really did it, it was heartfelt. I was doing it for me and for my dad. So there it is. Yeah, there's another shot. You got to get different angles. One where closes up. And also, I hope she put a link on there. Can you put a link? Can you make it an embeddable link on the Instagram to get to the...
Text of the book?
Maybe she should
her
have
description.
a tear sheet she could have taped to with some of the details of how to buy the book.
But
there's a picture of her and her mom.
Let me just say,
Happy Mother's Day.
I am for all of this, and I hope that it makes Steve Schmidt more toxic. This is a guy who, incidentally, as much as he hated Donald Trump, was willing to wheel out Howard Schultz, and had Howard Schultz had any traction, he would have hung in there for the millions of dollars he was being paid. And not just provide a solution that risks the imagination of a new kind of possibility, but also one that risks the reelection of Donald Trump. That could have also happened. So this is one of those situations where there's not enough popcorn in the world for me to have enjoyed that more.
Can I just say as a quick addendum, the John Weaver guy, who was the head of the pro-democracy faction for the McCain campaign, he resigned from the Lincoln Project in 2020 because he was accused of online harassment by 21 men, as well as offering personal and professional favors in exchange for sex to at least 10 of the men as well.
That's the accusation
That's the guy,
that,
right.
that Schmidt takes issue with, because he says none of that happened during the the
campaign.
Right. But if it sticks to Schmidt, why wouldn't it stick to McCain? All right. Folks, I'm sorry. We don't have any time for any more calls. Apologize. We got more clips. We'll play those tomorrow. JB Davis, here's a thought for you guys to check out and perhaps a guest or two. How many of the agencies of the U.S. government are still under control of the Trumpers? There are 3 that I deal with that must be, aside from DeJoy, whom Biden doesn't seem to want to get rid of. The Department of Education has a Biden appointee who is one of Cruella de Vos's top people. IRS is under Trump control, and HUD has a Trump Tower holdover. No, there's more. And I haven't seen anybody actually do a deep dive on this. And I've been looking for that article. So if you see anybody who's written about it, but it's very hard to see, you need very good reporting to see that wide of a net. Militant apathy. There we go. Christine Ford has had to move multiple times for coming out against Brett Kavanaugh, indeed. Drewish.
Jeez. Yeah, we never, sorry, just quickly, we never talk about the risk that she took anymore and like how her life was affected by this, but it's a whole separate conversation.
Illuminati kids. Clarence Thomas is following the footsteps of the philosophy of the respected Judge Smalls from Caddyshack, who sadly never made it to the Supreme Court, but still had these wide words, "You'll get nothing and like it." Another long hauler. All right, there's a whole list of David Gunn, John Britton, James Barrett, Shannon Lowy, Leanne Nichols, Robert Sanderson, Barnett Slippian, George Tiller, R. M. Stewart, Jennifer Markovsky, Garrett Swazi. Would all like a word with these people freaking out about protests outside of SCOTUS justice houses. Indeed. Ben Zed6. Hey, Sam, pardon the non sequitur, but the news has been so depressing this past weekend. I needed a short break, mental break. I decided best way to do this was to watch Who's the Caboose. I apologize if you said this before, but how many of the cast members did you know before filming? I enjoyed seeing some of the MR occasional guests, and it was surreal seeing everyone so young. Well, I knew them all. I wasn't, I was friendly with Andy Dick, but I wasn't as friends with him, as I was with Sarah or Benjamin or Cross. But I was friendly to some extent with all of them. There was no agent involved. We didn't go through agents or anything like that. Let's put it that way. Brooklyn Sue. Thanks, Sam, for the reminder of Bill Clinton in those revealing jogging shorts. Apologies.
Sorry.
Vote Charles Booker 2022. Got May 17th, week away from the Kentucky primary. Has there been a single Democrat come out in response to the culture of war issues that the Republicans are mainlining simply to just say our opponents have no economic plans to benefit the American people? They don't have a response to inflation, and by then is already allowed sales for more national drilling? I don't follow that comment. Sorry.
That'd be easier to do, make a economic push if Biden had an economic record to run on.
Yeah. JB Wutsy. Hey, folks, love the show. I just wanted to ask if you thought it might be useful to use longstanding Republican tactics against them, the same way they used activist judges as a term to start calling Clarence Thomas Republican Judge Clarence Thomas or Extremist Federalist Society Judge Clarence Thomas. Yes, of course, we should do that. District Jabroni. Sam, that was very mean about Meghan McCain. I think it's cute she left her terrible fan fiction in front of her very dead father's grave. That's the bold maverick behavior the McCains are known for. Gigi Palin. Sam, just tell this new strain of IM commenters to F off and touch grass. From a regular viewer's perspective, these asinine comments started soon after you started gaining more prominence on Twitch Discord. Also because Hassan always shouts out your good takes. They're Zoomers with no politics. They need to touch grass. All right, 4 more.
I just noticed this is how they do graves. Like Cindy hasn't died yet, and they already have her inscribed there.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Super weird to me, but that's fine.
Eric from Iowa, all these Republicans saying they want to fund more adoptions and maternal care are full of ass shite. They wanted to fund those things. They'd already be doing it. Of course. They'd be for mandatory and paid paternal leave, but they're not. Yes, of course. It's all a lie.
Well, the thing is, like, when they say, like, why don't they want us to have the children? Why don't they want us to help us, take care of it? Is they've thought that far ahead too, and they don't want to make it easier because they want you to have to give it up for adoption.
Sean from Maryland, this is just so horrifying. On top of women being treated like second-class citizens, just imagine the poverty and homelessness across the country when you have so many unwanted children without any support system to care for and raise them. The foster systems in this country are trash. What do you think the results of all of that then? We're living in a failed state. All right, 2 more. Bernadette, is the secret guest Bob Odenkirk? No. And the final I am of the day, Shelley. Will be interesting to see what the reaction is when impregnators start getting sued for child support. All right, folks.
Doubtful.
Matt, Bradley, Emma, good job today. See you folks tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted in and out of gear.